Why wait for Black Friday? Blink Friday starts now with up to 65% off Blink Smart Security. Check on your pets all season long with new Blink Mini 2K Plus plug-in cameras. See your gifts arrive in head-to-toe view with Blink Video Doorbell. Ready to use right out of the box. Just unwrap Blink and go. Pet setters to busy families. Blink Friday deals have your holidays covered. Tap the banner to save now.
BTW, FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an adjustable implant, 68 milligrams radiopaque. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome. You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, I went to Washington, D.C. I had a great meeting with the president and the vice president, but it was so cold that the exhibitionists were describing themselves to people. An old joke. No, it was bitterly cold. I managed to pick up a really nasty cold, and therefore I've been out of commission for several days. I want to thank Ken Matthews for stepping into the Stone Zone to fill in for me, but it is great to be back in the saddle again. In the meantime, I noticed that 6 Democrat members of Congress, Elisa Slotkin, a senator from Michigan, Mark Kelly, a senator from Arizona, Chris Deluzio, a congressman from Pennsylvania, Chrissy Houlihan, a congresswoman from Pennsylvania, Maggie Goodlander, a congresswoman from New Hampshire, and the particularly obnoxious Jason Crow, a congressman from Colorado, made what I think was a highly suspect video in which they urged members of our armed services to ignore an order from the commander-in-chief if that order was illegal. Not a single one of these Democrats, however, has been able to point to or define any order issued by President Trump that is illegal. So the White House is enraged after this group of federal Democrats released this video, encouraging members of our military to revolt in a shameless and direct attack on the rule of law. You see, this is yet another example of the practice by Democrats to always accuse your opponent of that which you yourself are actually doing. This comes from Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and once again, they are busted. Let's listen to these senators soil themselves.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution.
We know this is hard and that it's a difficult time to be a public servant.
But whether you're serving in the CIA,
the Army,
our Navy,
the Air Force,
your vigilance is critical.
And know that we have your back.
Because now, more than ever,
the American people need you. We need you to stand up for our laws,
our Constitution,
and who we are as Americans. Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up the ship.
So there you have it. And right here and now, therefore, I call on Senator Slotka, Senator Kelly, Congressman Deluzio, Congresswoman Houlihan, Congresswoman Goodlander, or Congressman Crow. Define for me exactly one illegal order. You can't do so because there are none. Yes, President Trump is working very hard to reform our military, which was weakened through the DEI and pro-vaccination, mandatory vaccination policies of Joe Biden, and to clean up the deep state that has utilized the FBI and the CIA as politically weaponized, politicized units of our judicial system. But none of those people can define any illegal order. All you've seen are orders that they don't like. Now, if a Republican said any of that, they would be immediately charged with seditious behavior and treason. But I think that's what it is. Carolyn Leavitt, the press secretary for President Trump, said they were leaning into their credentials as former members of our military, as veterans, as former members of the national security apparatus to signal to people serving under this commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, that you can defy him and you can betray your oath of office. This is indeed a very, very dangerous message. And it is perhaps punishable by law. I saw Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche on with Sean Hannity the other night. I think he did an excellent job pointing out that while he would not confirm or deny a formal investigation, that there are no illegal orders issued by President Donald Trump. There are orders of reform, which they are resisting. Once again, we see the two-tiered justice system. One system for Democrats, another for Republicans. The actions of these members of Congress are despicable. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has unveiled a peace plan, which of course would require compliance from the Ukrainians and the Russians. So President Trump released a 28-point peace plan that will bring about an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. He's demanding that both sides get on board, as there will never be a better opportunity for peace than there is right now. Just to review that plan, under the president's proposed but not yet enacted or approved plan, the Ukraine would recognize that Crimea, much of the Donbass, including parts of Donetsk Oblast and Luhansk Oblast, are under Russian control. By the way, 90% of the people in those localities speak Russian, and when a plebiscite was held in those areas with a 90% turnout, 90% voted to reconnect themselves to Russia, something that gets forgotten. To be clear, I think we need to review what this war is about. When the Russians agreed to the reunification of East and West Germany, we, the United States, with George H.W. Bush as president and James A. Baker III as Secretary of State, signed the Budapest Memorandum. That was an agreement with the Russians in which we agreed not to push Ukraine into NATO, which really means not to mount U.S.-funded NATO missiles on the ground in Ukraine aimed at Russia. We are in violation of that agreement today. We reaffirmed that agreement in the Minsk Accords. We signed it yet again. And yet again, our actions in Ukraine are in violation of that agreement. This is very much like the situation here in the United States in 1962, when Nikita Khrushchev mounted Russian missiles 90 miles off our shore in Cuba. JFK and his brother Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Attorney General, and his chief advisor did not react well to that, nor did the American people. Why is this any different? So under this plan, Ukraine would be barred from future membership in NATO, which would be embedded in its constitution, and NATO would agree not to accept Ukraine. Ukraine's armed forces would be capped at 600,000 personnel under the draft plan. A non-aggression pact would be established among Russia, Ukraine, and the NATO European nations. If Russia launched a significant, deliberate, or sustained attack in the future, that would trigger security guarantees from the United States, including sanctions, military, and other responses, although the exact mechanism for that is not exactly spelled out. Also parts of the deal, use of frozen Russian assets, which are currently estimated to be around $100 billion to help rebuild Ukraine, potential reintegration of Russia into the global economy, and revival of the Group of Eight, also known as the G8, under certain conditions, elections in Ukraine within 100 days of deal signing, and educational cultural programs to promote tolerance. Now, don't let anyone tell you the war in Ukraine is about small d democracy, because Zelensky has postponed any elections for the immediate future. And he knows if there is an election in Ukraine, well, he would lose. A peace board would be set up under this proposed agreement or some other oversight entity to monitor the implementation. Ukraine would receive robust security guarantees, although the nature of those troops, bases, timing is yet to be worked out. Now, many Ukrainian officials have warned that the plan is unacceptable because it gives up territory, particularly the Crimea, which undermines Ukrainian sovereignty. Russia gains major strategic concessions, recognition of Crimea, parts of the Donbass, freezing of front lines in the key southern regions. The proposal also limits Ukraine's future alliance options, blocking NATO membership and reducing its military capacity. The guarantee for Ukraine is a case of renewed Russian aggression is seen as weaker, less binding than direct NATO protection, some critics have argued. European allies and NATO partners are concerned that they were insufficiently consulted in this U.S.-led draft. They weren't consulted because, well, they don't want to end this war. The plan remains a draft, it's important to note, not formally signed or accepted by Ukraine or Russia. Ukraine's leadership has said that they are reviewing it and will engage constructively, but by no means have they committed to it. There is pressure, according to some reports, via deadlines or expectations for Ukraine to accept. Now, here's why it matters. This plan signals a significant shift from prior U.S. Western policy, which broadly supported Ukraine's territorial integrity and rejected ceding occupied land. But again, remember, we agreed not to push Ukraine into NATO, so that violation exists as well. If implemented, it would reshape the security architecture of Eastern Europe. Ukraine is barred from NATO. Russia re-legitimized, and some say new territorial facts on the ground. But let's be very clear. NATO has outlived its usefulness. NATO was set up after World War II when those nations were devastated, but America's economy was still strong. Since then, it has been abused, and none of the NATO nations, almost all of which have been invaded with unlimited illegal immigration, have been willing to pay for their fair share of this war. They want to leave that to the United States. So I support the president's peace plan. I know some will call me a Russian lackey and so on. I ignore all that, although I do love Russian vodka. This decision will affirm Ukraine's sovereignty, achieves a non-aggression pact between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe, stops Russia from incursions into Europe, facilitate better relations between Russia and NATO, gives security guarantees to Ukraine, limits Ukraine military buildup, keeps Ukraine out of NATO and NATO out of Ukraine. We already agreed to that twice in 2 signed agreements with the Russians. Stations European fighter jets in Poland, reinstates democratic elections in Ukraine. Zelensky sure doesn't want that. Invests considerable resources into rebuilding Ukraine, reportedly as much as $100 billion. Reintegrates Russia once again into the global economy, and extends nuclear non-proliferation treaties, splits nuclear power between Russia and Ukraine, and starts the de-radicalization process. So I think President Trump has created a fair and equitable deal that could, if both Russia and Ukraine agree, be agreed upon. President Trump is giving Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky until Thanksgiving to accept, as he's been cold on the deal so far. Zelensky has criticized the deal as he does not want the war to end because it gives him an excuse to stay in power, cancel elections, and grift hundreds of millions of dollars more for golden toilets along with his profiteering cronies. But he may not have a choice. This peace deal may be the only thing that prevents Zelensky from getting the Ceausescu treatment that I think he so richly deserves. Zelensky should sign President Trump's generous deal, then work on an expedient escape plan before his people can bring him to justice. I do want to say that it's great to be back here in the Stone Zone after being gone for a couple of days. And, I'm very grateful for the, shall we say, the mystery and the majesty of Western medicine. I'm the kind of guy who doesn't normally like to take an aspirin, but it is only because of the antibiotics and the other natural healing supplements, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc particularly, that I'm back in the saddle. And I want to thank Mrs. Stone for staying on me to keep taking my meds and get enough sleep. It's great to be back in the Stone Zone, and we have so much more when we come back. So whatever you do, please don't touch that dial.
If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy.
Download and subscribe
at BeBullish.com.
BTW, FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an adjustable implant, 68 milligrams radiopaque. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
The Stone Zone. Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate those warm words from Vice President J.D. Vance. Well, as I predicted right here in the Stone Zone only days ago, the Jeffrey Epstein scandal has come crashing down around the ears of Democrats, because once we have all these records, you're going to see the people who visited his islands of political nature were virtually all Democrats, leading with Bill Clinton, who, although he formally denies ever being on the island, I established in my book, The Clintons' War on Women, published in 2015, that he was on the island at least 13 times. He was on Epstein's Lolita Express plane on 26 occasions. But now we've learned that Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands was actually texting during a House Oversight Committee hearing in which Epstein was actually feeding Plaskett questions to be asked of disgraced former Trump attorney Michael Cohen. Let's listen to this.
I believe that Jeffrey Epstein had information, and I was going to get information to get at the truth. Having a friendship with him is not something that I would deem to have. And so I'm just looking forward. I'm moving forward. And I think that that's what we as American people should do, is move forward. If individuals are not involved in illegal activity, extending his criminal enterprise or his financial enterprise or all of those things, I think that we need to look at what people are doing moving forward.
Wait, let me just better understand that. What is that point? Because at the time he was a known sex offender and it had been detailed all the sexual abuse.
There are a lot of people who have done a lot of crimes, and as a prosecutor, you get information from people where you can.
That word salad impressed nobody. Let's be very clear. Congresswoman Plaskett not only solicited and got campaign contributions from a man who had already been convicted of sex crimes in the state of Florida, but she also got a personal loan from him. The Democrats rallying around her, refusing to hold her accountable, shows they don't really care about justice for Epstein's victims. They just want something they can use as a partisan cudgel against President Donald Trump. Now that the legislation to release Epstein's files completely has passed, with President Trump's endorsement, expect more embarrassing revelations to emerge that show how it is Democrats who kissed up to Epstein after he was publicly revealed as a sex predator. Stone, they say, name names. All right, I will. Bill Clinton, Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, U.S. Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, big Democrat donor Bill Gates. They all visited the island, not once, not twice, but multiple times. I think they have some explaining to do. One thing is absolutely clear: the Democrats keep denying. Donald Trump figured Jeffrey Epstein out in late 2004. Cut him out and banished him from his life and all of his properties prior to Epstein being exposed and busted for sex charges in the Sunshine State of Florida. The Epstein scandal is backfiring in a devastating manner on the Democrats. Sometimes you should not worry about what you asked for. They're going to be sorry they asked for this. I'm Roger Stone. We'll be right back in the Stone Zone, so don't go away.
Discover the extraordinary fragrance Ariana Grande REM Cherry Eclipse. Delight in black cherry jubilee, sugared honeysuckle, marshmallow meringue, and glowing amber. Get the perfect fragrance. Ariana Grande's REM Cherry Eclipse, exclusively at Ulta Beauty.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. While I was taking a few days off to recuperate from a terrible head cold, there was a funeral held for former Vice President Dick Cheney. And it's amazing that every former president, Republican and Democrat, all of them proponents of endless foreign war, were there to feat a man who lied this nation into war. It was Vice President Dick Cheney who created the entirely false narrative that the people of Iraq had, under Saddam Hussein, weapons of mass destruction. That was a lie. He forced Colin Powell, then the National Security Advisor, to insist on the floor of the United Nations that Iraq possessed yellow cake uranium necessary for the construction of nuclear weapons. That was a lie. And he also implied that the Iraqis were involved in the attack on America in 9/11. That was a lie as well. So Dick Cheney is a man responsible for the deaths of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. And then I never quite understood this part. If Dick Cheney had literally millions of dollars worth of Halliburton stock because he left the position as the chief executive officer of Halliburton to become vice president, and that stock was put into a blind trust. And because of the Iraq War's reconstruction efforts and war efforts, the value of that stock skyrocketed, and Cheney made tens of millions of dollars. If he knew it was in his blind trust, how could the trust be blind? No, he was a warmonger, and he was celebrated by warmongers. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance were not invited. In my view, Dick Cheney is a man who was the ultimate Washington insider. He appointed by George W. Bush to head a search committee to find the perfect vice presidential running mate. Dick Cheney systematically destroyed the prospects of every prospective candidate until the only other person available was, well, Dick Cheney himself. What's amazing is how the media flipped. They thought he was Darth Vader, the worst human being that ever lived, until his daughter rose as a critic of Donald Trump. And then Trump derangement syndrome took over. So I now see people kissing the derriere of Dick Cheney, who I think is in a very warm place right now, only because of their hatred of Donald Trump. Meanwhile, a piece in the UK Daily Mail yesterday said that the Bush crime family is planning to retake control of the Republican Party post Donald Trump. Good luck with that. I exposed the Bush crime family in my book by that title, The Bush Crime Family. The family money originally came when Prescott Bush, who was a partner at Brown Brothers Harriman, the investment bank, but also the U.S. Senator from my native Connecticut, raised the money to arm Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. That's where the family money came from. I actually published in my book the documents from the National Archive that proved that. Fortunately, I made a copy because when I went back to the National Archive to look at them again, well, guess what? They had disappeared. So the Republican Party, being the party of endless foreign war, being the party of the financial elite, being the party of Wall Street and the country clubs, those days are over. Vice President J.D. Vance is warning the Republican Party about backsliding into the pre-Trump days after President Trump is termed out in 2028. There's already talk of the Bush-era gang coming back, as I say, to reclaim the GOP once Trump is gone. And through relentless attacks on Tucker Carlson, Senator Ted Cruz, who got his big break as a Bush attorney during the disputed 2000 election, is trying to position himself as the man who will take the Republican Party back to the America Last neoconservative point of view. If Lion Ted Cruz runs for president, he will get his butt kicked like he did last time. Let's listen to J.D. Vance.
There is an effort to try to wrest control of the Republican Party away from the voters and away from the coalition that really delivered the big victory in 2024. I think it's a huge mistake. Look, the American people don't want stupid wars and America's jobs going overseas and wide open borders. That is, whether intentional or not, that was the legacy of the Republican Party that came before Donald J. Trump. I'm glad the president got us away from that Republican Party. It lost, but it was also a disaster for the United States of America. Let's actually have a foreign policy where we focus on the interests of American citizens. Let's have an economic policy that's about building in the United States of America rather than shipping all of our jobs overseas and getting Wall Street enriched in the process. Let's have an economic policy that's about more self-sufficiency.
Vice President Vance, of course, is absolutely correct. Now, there's a great deal of strife within the conservative movement right now as the neocons and those in the Bush wing of the party saw their opportunity to strike immediately after the assassination of my good friend Charlie Kirk. They're attempting to exert control and cancel culture over MAGA. They want to be the gatekeepers like they were for the generations before Trump came down that golden escalator. This is the hostile fifth column operating to undermine the America First movement from within. We must ignore their nonsense and work to get the strongest Republican first candidates through the primaries next year and then get them elected to all levels of government to keep the movement to make America great again strong throughout President Trump's presidency and beyond. But those who think that we are going to return to the country club days of the Bushes, well, they have another thing coming. President Trump, by the way, has an opportunity that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. November is Alzheimer's Disease Month, and most of us have had this debilitating disease impact our lives in some manner as we watch loved ones forget their loved ones, lose their faculties, and wither away. My own great-grandmother, a great and very strong Hungarian woman, suffered from Alzheimer's. It was heartbreaking. Of course, we all saw the decline of President Ronald Reagan after he left office. But now we're on the cusp of a preventative treatment that can nip Alzheimer's in the bud. And once President Trump can take measures to develop these treatments and add another monumental achievement to his already Rushmore-worthy legacy, I think he will do so. 2 therapies approved by the FDA have been shown to slow the amyloid plaque buildup in the brain in early-stage patients, and a trailblazing blood test allows Alzheimer's to be detected far earlier than ever before. So a widespread study from U.S. Pointer additionally shows that proper diet, regular physical activity, social interaction, and cognitive exercise can drastically improve brain function. Couple the scientific discoveries aided by AI tools that can map brain function more effectively than ever before, we now have a blueprint for mental fitness, and it will be easier to ward off Alzheimer's and help more elderly Americans live with dignity in their golden years. A poll commissioned by Tony Fabrizio and Bob Ward shows that 92% of voters support a national effort to stop Alzheimer's disease. Additionally, 90% of voters would credit President Trump if he mandated Medicare and Medicaid to cover life-saving FDA-approved detection tools and treatments to combat this horrific condition. A Make America Healthy agenda is not complete until it addresses Alzheimer's. President Trump should, in my opinion, make this a key point of his agenda, as it would unite Americans who have been affected by the disease, regardless of their politics or their partisan lines, help vulnerable people who are or will be made helpless by this horrible disease, and of course be a major winning issue heading into next year's crucial elections. Meanwhile, 5 Antifa radicals admitted to their associations with left-wing terror groups while submitting to plea deals for their role in a coordinated campaign against ICE agents in the Prairie Land facility in Alvarado, Texas on the 4th of July. In their guilty pleas, Seth Sykes, Joy Abigail Gibson, Lynette Reed Sharp, Nathan Bauman, and John Philip Thomas admitted that their Antifa cell had conducted an act of terrorism. They took responsibility for the ambush attack and shooting, which resulted in one officer taking a bullet wound to the neck. The indictment also gives insight into how Antifa cells operate, with leaders calling local chapters affinity groups in order to conceal the violent and subversive nature of their activities. The Antifa thugs are organizing across the country, attempting to block the perfectly legal ICE enforcement of our current immigration laws through violence. Their behavior was previously tolerated with complicit cowards like former FBI Director Christopher Wray, who actually claimed in his sworn testimony before Congress that Antifa was just an idea and that there wasn't even an organized group behind their efforts. My questions become quite simple. Who pays for the bricks? Who pays for the flatbed trucks? Who pays for the buses? Who pays for the lawyers who show up to bail out the Antifa actors when they are arresting? President Trump is now showing what can be done. Now that Antifa thugs are being unmasked and Antifa has been declared a terrorist organization, and those involved are facing terrorist charges for their behavior, their boots on the ground know that the crackdown is at hand. They know that President Trump is serious, and he'll hit them with the harshest possible charges imaginable. If they don't want to end up in Gitmo, they will cut the crap and go back to smoking dope with transgender dregs at homeless shelters in Portland, or whatever it is they do in their spare time. Meanwhile, Eric Swalwell, under fire for the fact that he seems to have lied on his deed and claims to be a legal permanent resident of the District of Columbia while serving as a member of Congress from California, says that he's going to be running for governor of California. Swalwell is claiming that he's running to be a fighter and protector of California. Swalwell infamously, of course, engaged in a extramarital relation with a Chinese spy, Christine Fang, also known as Fang Fang. She would mysteriously die in a plane accident afterwards, but it's important to note that Swalwell's relationship with the Communist Chinese spy took place at a time that he was a member of the House Intelligence Committee. In other words, at a time that he had access to classified information. This is, by the way, the same congressman who accused me for 3 years of being a Russian asset. Now we know that he was actually a communist Chinese asset, or at least he was penetrating one, and she was penetrating his office, because we know for a fact that she placed personnel in his congressional office. Despite serving as a congressman from California's 15th district and claiming that Livermore, California was his official home, he declared on his Washington, D.C. property deed that his principal residence was an address in Washington, D.C. That was dated April 18, 2022, confirming the property was designated as a condition of his mortgage loan. The deed includes explicit language making the borrower liable for false or misleading statements regarding occupancy. Now, under Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, members of Congress must be, quote, inhabitants, close quote, of the state they represent at the time of their election. Swalwell's inability to maintain a California home, indeed, he claims no current California residence other than in his official biography posted on the website of the House, his 2025 financial disclosure report paints an even bleaker picture. So somehow, despite earning $174,000 a year for 13 years in Congress, Swalwell has failed to pay down his student loans, remains mired in credit card debt, and even has cashed out his pension. Yet he seems to live in a $1.2 million mansion. The bottom line is simple. This guy is a deadbeat, and he's a crook. He should be in jail. Instead, he's decided to use his new notoriety to run for governor of California. On the other hand, he may have looked at the current frontrunner in that race, Katie Porter, and if so, I could see why he's decided to run. Do you ever notice how they all have those crazy eyes? AOC, Adam Schiff, Eric Swalwell, Katie Porter. It's what they all have in common. The Democrat Party is in deep trouble. All right, you're back in the Stone Zone. I'm great to be back in the saddle with you. We've got more politics coming up on the other side. I do want to point out that the president is struggling to reach an end to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and we reported extensively today on his peace plan. It is a peace plan that I support. I think the American people should support, and I pray that the Ukrainians and the Russians will support. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Well, you can add House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to the list of Democrat officials who are getting shamed over their association with Jeffrey Epstein. When Jeffries was beginning his ascent up the political ladder, a Democrat consulting firm representing him authored a gushing letter to Jeffrey Epstein, hoping to meet with Epstein in 2013, many years after he had been convicted of soliciting a minor for sex in the state of Florida. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer called Jeffries out on the floor. Congressman Comer said, another email shows Democrat fundraisers invited Epstein to an event or to meet privately with Hakeem Jeffries as part of their 2013 effort to win a majority. So Hakeem Jeffries' campaign solicited money from Jeffrey Epstein. That's what we found in the last document bench. Along with Congressman Comer, I support and have always supported full transparency when it comes to all of the documents pertaining to Jeffrey Epstein. It was in my book, The Clintons' War on Women, which I published back in 2015, that I fully exposed the relationship with Bill Clinton and his wife and Jeffrey Epstein. The seed money for the funding of the Clinton Global Initiative and the Clinton Foundation came from Jeffrey Epstein. In fact, Jeffrey Epstein also funded something called the Terra Mar Foundation, although it was alleged to be an environmental foundation run by his cohort and pimp, Ghislaine Maxwell. It was, in fact, just a grooming pool for young female interns. 100% of the funding for that came from the Clinton Foundation. It's Bill Clinton who was on Epstein's island at least 13 times, as established by the sworn testimony of various women who did not settle their legal claims against Jeffrey Epstein, including Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who I interviewed myself for 6 hours, 2 3-hour sessions in preparation for my book. The longest chapter in that book, Orgy Island, a title I took from my good friend Sean Hannity, begins with a famous quote. Jeffrey Epstein said, "Well, he owes me a favor." I would also note that after Donald Trump was elected, according to this new batch of emails, and Epstein's cohorts were upset about Trump's election, Epstein specifically said, "Don't worry, Bannon with me." What's that supposed to mean? As a number of these emails demonstrate, Steve Bannon, putatively a MAGA supporter, but in this case, a close associate of Jeffrey Epstein, had an active involvement, visited Epstein in his New York home, visited Epstein in his Paris apartment, and was actually plotting with Epstein, coaching him on his rehabilitation. Steve Bannon filmed 15 hours of video with Jeffrey Epstein in preparation for that rehabilitation campaign. How could anyone justify meeting with a convicted sex criminal, never mind soliciting money from them? Steve Bannon is now busted. People say to me, "What's your beef with Bannon?" It's very, very simple. He testified before the House Intelligence Committee under oath, as I did. He was asked, "Did you ever talk to Roger Stone about WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, or the allegedly stolen emails?" He said, "No, never." When asked that exact same question as a surprise witness for Robert Mueller at my Washington, D.C. Soviet-style show trial, Bannon gave a completely contradictory answer, saying, yes, he had discussed WikiLeaks and Julian Assange with me every time we spoke on the phone in 2016. And then he unhelpfully added that he considered me to be the Trump campaign's access point with WikiLeaks, obviously coached by the prosecutors. So the judge wouldn't let us ask Steve Bannon about his contradictory sworn testimony. But for those who say, what is Roger Stone's beef with Steve Bannon? There you have it. He helped set me up for a 7 to 9 year prison term when everybody knows Roger Stone did nothing wrong. Thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. And until next week, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?